What's good people? Welcome to Whole Views. Thank you for clicking that thumbnail. My name is Corey, and today we're going to be discussing Ahsoka Episode 8, the finale episode of Season 1. So when I previously talked about the show, I liked to mention the show being like a limited series. That was the way I kind of talked about it because that was the way they announced it. But after watching this episode, this finale, it leaves me in a place where I know with a level of certainty that there will be more from Ahsoka and Sabine and Ezra. The story of Grand Admiral Thrawn is not nearly finished. You know, they tease that character out so much during this series and making him such this imposing threat, and then you get to this finale episode and all he does is tuck tail and run. Now I know that the character is so strategic that there must be some level of planning that he's doing and there must be some type of payoff, but we do not see it in this episode, which leads me to believe that either we're going to get more of him or we're going to get more stories from the Dave Filoni, Ahsoka, Sabine characters. We're just going to get more from them, whether it's in a movie form or whether it's in more seasons of a show. I must say that there are so many things that you can touch on in this episode and in this series that really you could talk for a long time about, but I'm gonna pick a few topics and just discuss some of the things that I like that they wrapped up and did quite well with this finale episode. I want to start off by saying I am happy with the episode, though. It is a good episode. You get a fair amount of action, you get some conclusions to some storylines, and then you have some threads that's just lingering. So let's talk first about the conclusions of some storylines. You get Ezra returning home. I like the fact that Sabine finally listens to what Huyang says and stays with Ahsoka. Like, y'all must be together. I'm glad that she didn't abandon Ahsoka there and we get her alone. Like, we got those two together. She's gonna have time to train and move forward as a Mandalorian Jedi. Is going to be a cool look for that character. I'm glad that they decided to do that with her character. I'm glad that Ezra made it back to the world, so now he can like interact with Hera and all the other characters in his universe. He can confirm the threat that Thrawn is and like validate all Hera's actions, all Ahsoka's actions, all Sabine's actions. Like, we have evidence now that there is a real threat out there, and that threat is now returned home, and you're going to get a connection to probably some of the stuff that happens in the Rey series of Star Wars live action films, because that's kind of where this stuff takes place. You get the conclusion of the Morgan character's story, and I feel like she got played. There's no confirmation that Thrawn went into it with sinister thoughts in mind or plans in place for her character, but to me, as soon as they started talking about we're gonna bless you with the gift of shadows, and they kept talking about the idea of your loyalty in your life, and basically you got to guarantee us that you're willing to die for the cause here. And it just felt like they were setting her up then. And then when you get Ahsoka and Sabine and Ezra approaching the base, there's this like, hey, you know what you got to do. And it's like, you got set up for this. They put you in place to die. And it was weird that her character went out like that. She did provide us with an awesome lightsaber knife type fight. It was a very cool fight. And actually, watching the episode, I've kind of felt as though Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka did not feel as up to some of the other characters when it came to the physicality of her character. I know when you watch her in the Clone Wars and you see the little clips of the way she would yield the dual lightsabers, you know, it was so much faster. She was so much more fluid when moving, but now that character is aged, it's live action. You can't get the exact same motions. So she moved a little bit slower when fighting the zombie stormtroopers. But when you get her in the fight with Morgan and she's got the glowing green blade and Ahsoka has her dual blades and they really going at it, that fight choreography was really good. And you could tell that they put a little bit more time into that fight choreography than they did her against those zombie stormtroopers. The zombie stormtroopers was crazy. It was just a wild thing to do. I didn't think that would ever be a thing that popped up with Star Wars, but that also leads me to another point of those sisters, the three witches, playing a much larger role here in this episode with that zombie magic, and just seeing that magic and the chants and all the stuff that they did with the creation of the sword out of thin air. It's like all that stuff was way more over the top than I've ever expected or saw inside Star Wars. Not saying it's a bad thing, but it was just a little bit more than I'm used to. So we've talked about Ezra, we've talked about Sabine being present at the end and making that decision to stay with Ahsoka. But let's talk about Ahsoka away from the fighting and talk about more with her in the maturation of her character is what I want to call it. So you talk about that episode, I think it was 5, that I called it Beautiful Filler. And in that episode, you have the character development episode of Ahsoka, where she's come to a place now where she accepts the way Anakin kind of turned out with the whole Darth Vader thing. She realizes that she's not a part of that. That doesn't really have that much impact on her. She's gonna walk her own path, and she has to be there for her young Padawan, just like Anakin was there for her throughout their adventure. So you see all that stuff that was done and all that development of her character and moving her to a good place where she's able to be a mentor and ready to be a true mentor and master to her Padawan. You see that stuff kind of play out here in this episode, and I'm like, yes, that gives so much weight to that episode, and it makes that episode so much better. I know a lot of people probably saw it on the front end, but me not knowing everything inside of the Star Wars universe, not being the biggest of big Star Wars nerd fans, I didn't see it. But seeing it here come to fruition, like I feel why you did that there, so you can have all that payoff here, and her like not being angry with Sabine for going with Baylan, and now they're united and they are just ready to move forward without any more conflict between the two. It was cool. I was glad that that episode was kind of paid off and gratified and justified in this episode. I mentioned Baylan. Let's talk about loose threads. We have Shin, who is seemingly just grouping up with a bunch of stragglers out there. It just seems like that's what she's doing. She holds up the lightsaber, she rides into their camp, I'm assuming, and she's gonna be down with their crew. You have Baylan, who's out on a mountain with people, like mountains of people, and I guess there's some type of ancient history that he's still searching for that they did not pay off in this episode. I'm upset about that. Baylan's character and what he was searching for was one of the things that I was most intrigued about going into this episode. So seeing that there's not much of a payoff to it, and I'm sure that they didn't have the time and the budget, and just it would not have flowed well with the episode if you took a chunk of this episode out and showed all what Baylan was into. But I do hope at some point Baylan, that character, gets recast, because Ray Stevens is no longer with us. I hope that Baylan gets recast and we get to see a conclusion to his story, and we get some nods as to what it was he was going after. I do know that there are some bigger Star Wars fans out there, and I've seen a few images of people showing like a temple with some characters that resemble the people who were in the mountains and all that. Like, there's people who saw and know some things more than I, and I'm gonna have to go and check out some of those videos. But as far as I know and understand, there's a lot to be explained when it comes to Baylan's character, and I want to see it get explained on the screen because I really like that character, and I thought his arc changing from being a true henchman to being, hey, I have my own motives, that was cool, and I want to see what those motives were. Pay all that off. With Baylan being left behind and Shin being left behind, we have those threads left hanging. The only thread that is left unraveled still at the end of the episode is Thrawn, because he leaves, and one, they don't truly explain why he was so like cautious against Ahsoka. I know they mention the fact that she's Anakin Skywalker's Padawan and like that's his apprentice. So the question then becomes like, yo, if you know that, what kind of connection did y'all have? What kind of encounters did y'all have? And as well as, and this is the bigger question for me, what are you in a rush to get back to? Because the Empire has been kind of scattered and blown to the wind. The New Republic is still thriving at this point, and they believe to have control. So my thought is just, what's next for you? That's the big question when it comes to Thrawn. When are we gonna see you again as a part of a film, as a part of a series? I wanna know. Are there any threads from this episode that you feel like should have been addressed? How did you feel about the finale? I've seen some people feel kind of disappointed. They wanted to see more, and some people were satisfied and they feel as though this is hopeful that we're gonna get season 2 of Ahsoka and we're gonna get more from that character in that world. So let me know your thoughts about it. I would love to know them in the comment section. That's all I have for this here video, y'all. Enjoy yourself, guard your heart, and go watch something good.